She is back with a sequel because we needed one. So please give a warm welcome to Ash.
I'm back. Last month, I stood on this stage and I told you a story about my second time around. I told you about how my life in California ended, how my marriage imploded, how I lost my job, and how I packed up my car, put my dogs in the back, and drove until I eventually found my way to Tucson. As you can imagine, it was very lighthearted. Everybody had a great time. It was the story that Britt heard right before she threw up everywhere. But she swears it was a coincidence. That story was true, but it wasn't the whole story. I told you that around that time, right before I left California, I had started watching Eat, Pray, Love on repeat, which is how I knew I was really not doing very well. And I told you that leaving the country wasn't an option for me, so enlightenment would have to be found domestically. What I didn't tell you was why leaving the country wasn't an option. So here's the naked truth. I didn't stay in my marriage because I was in love. I stayed because the immigration system wouldn't let me leave. When I first moved to the US, I did it the way that you're supposed to. For years, my right to stay here was sponsored by the companies that I worked for, which at first felt kind of flattering. This idea, like you're valuable enough that someone is willing to pay extra just to keep you around. But what that actually means is that your entire life is conditional. Because if there's a merger or a restructure or a bad quarter or someone just decides that they don't like you anymore, you don't just lose your job. You lose your home, your community, your pets, your entire life in this country. And for me, at that time, if I had lost my job, my grace period was 10 days. 10 days to pack up everything I owned and get the fuck out. And if I overstayed by even just 1 day, I would be in breach of immigration law, which typically comes with a re-entry ban that can last up to a decade. After a couple of years living in the US, I had my first scare. The company that had paid me to relocate went through a heavy round of layoffs. My boss's boss had to cut about a quarter of our team. Now, he didn't really know me, he didn't know what I did, and of course, he didn't talk to my manager, because why would he do that? He made the decision by counting activity in an internal system. Literally, he counted comments. He had concluded that whoever talked the most was obviously working the hardest, and thus was the most valuable to keep. My legal right to stay in the country was saved by the fact that I am aggressively chatty. Which is funny, because my entire childhood, my parents said that I talk too much. They, I think, were obviously mistaken. I asked him about it later. And when he explained his comment counting methodology to me, I was struck by how careless that was. It made me want to punch him in the face. But that too would have gotten me deported. So that was what life was like for years. Overperforming, not pissing anyone off, keeping my head down, and quietly understanding that everything I was building could be taken at any moment. So when I fell in love and was eventually proposed to, it didn't really feel like this big romantic thing. It felt like safety, stability, like exhaling after having held your breath for a really long time. which in hindsight, maybe not the best reason to get married, but here we are. I realized pretty quickly that I didn't want a corporation deciding whether I was worthy of being here anymore. So I applied for a green card through my marriage. It was approved. I was lucky. I certainly thought so at the time. But that green card came with conditions. A 2-year prove it's real period, because nothing strengthens a marriage like a federally mandated performance review. If we were still married after 2 years, the condition would be lifted. And after 7 years of following the rules, working hard, paying taxes, my ability to stay in this country would finally belong to me. What I didn't understand at the time was how quickly love can turn into leverage. It had never occurred to me that I had simply shifted the power from one conditional system to another. Because at some point, my marriage stopped feeling like a relationship. It stopped feeling like love. It started feeling like control. It started feeling like coercion, and eventually it got violent. I knew things were bad. I knew I had become isolated. I knew I was slowly disappearing in my own life. But knowing something and having the ability to act on it are two very different things. So I did what I think a lot of women do when they don't have agency. I minimized, I rationalized, I convinced myself it wasn't that bad. I told myself that I was strong and capable, that if I just held on a little longer, I'd get through intact. Which is a very convincing lie to tell yourself, right up until you realize that strength really doesn't mean jack shit when someone else holds all the power. There's a particular kind of shame that comes with staying when you know better. It's quiet, it's nagging, it doesn't go away. It feels like endurance, but it's survival. And it teaches you to be very careful about how you speak, what you say, how much of the truth you tell. So when my marriage did end, suddenly and explosively, it wasn't because I got brave. It wasn't because I finally spoke up. It ended because the situation escalated in a way that made staying impossible. And when it did, I had no idea what the fuck I was going to do. It happened 1 month. 1 month before the conditions were set to expire on my green card. 1 month before I was free and clear. 1 month before I would finally have agency over my own fucking life. So no, I couldn't just leave the country and go eat, pray, love my way around the world. I couldn't even go home. I couldn't go back to Australia, where my support system still was. Because if I had left, I wouldn't have been allowed to come back. What followed was mountains of paperwork, months and months of waiting in fear, and a very real possibility that everything I'd built would be taken anyway. I stayed in that marriage because I was trapped. I survived it, I tolerated it, because I had no other options. And that is what the immigration system does to people. Even to people like me, even to people with privilege. On paper, my immigration story looks like a success story. And to be honest, that's usually how I frame it because it's way less complicated than all of this. But the naked truth, it almost killed me. I did everything right. I followed the rules. I filed the paperwork. I waited my turn. And still, my safety, my future, my life was tied to a system that didn't care if I was okay. It only cared that I was compliant. Thankfully, those days are well and truly behind me now. But it does feel painfully relevant at the moment. Because as we watch ICE raid our streets, as we watch people disappear, get detained, deported, killed, it's important to say this out loud. You can follow every rule and still be disposable. You can be legal and still be unsafe. You can be a fucking American citizen and still get shot in the goddamn street. That is not an immigration system. That is intimidation. That is violence. And let me be so fucking clear, what happened in Minnesota last month, that was murder. So yeah, fuck ICE. Here's the part I want to say carefully. It's impossible to not be angry right now. I'm exhausted, I'm fucking furious, and it's not even happening to me. I'm standing here with gratitude. I found a way to stay. I'm an American citizen now, which still sounds batshit crazy when I say it out loud. A pathway opened for me against the odds. I found a way through. I was one of the lucky ones. But my survival doesn't make the system just. It just means that I survived it. And too many people don't. Thank you.